Hello, my name is Kelly Bailey. I received my BA from the University of Northern Iowa in elementary education and elementary art education. My current teaching position is K-5 elementary school art, and I have been teaching for 11 years. The problem that we faced was, will positive behavior intervention and supports, also known as PBIS, affect student reading scores and self-efficacy? The audience for this one was fourth grade behavior disorder students, also known as BD students, and we're looking to see if PBIS would affect BD students specifically in a positive way. So what is PBIS? PBIS is not a curriculum that is followed. It's actually a school-wide intervention, and it is a three-tier system where the majority of students are placed on the first tier, and everything is positive supports. So if students are seen doing something in a positive way, that is acknowledged. Hopefully then students will follow the positive and make those positive choices. The BD students are typically placed on tier 3. So this is where the difference comes in. Tier 3 is a more individualized system. The students typically have IEPs. The students typically have individuals who work with them and follow them around daily. So they have a more individualized system. They might have point sheets, things along those lines. PBIS is also implemented over a 3-year period. The school that was in this study was in the first year of implementation, where the majority of PBIS is looked for in the hallways. However, teachers did have the option to do it in their individual classrooms, so I chose to do that for this study. Literature review. Will PBIS affect BD students' reading scores and self-efficacy in a positive way? So I was looking to see if PBIS would affect the BD students more rather than the whole school, which most of the work was looked at. Why self-efficacy is so important to academic performance. The idea is PBIS raises student self-efficacy because they start feeling better about themselves and the choices that they make. Self-efficacy supposedly helps with confidence level, and it is associated with students' performance. So if they have higher self-efficacy, the students then have a higher confidence level, which then leads to higher performance. Students who have high self-efficacy are also known to handle new challenges better. So if they're faced with new challenges, whether it's schoolwork, tests, things that they face, they handle these new challenges better. High self-efficacy is also associated with high resilience in education. So another positive effect of high self-efficacy is that they are very resilient. So if they do have something that they face that is challenging, or they have a hard time with a piece of work, they still are able to bounce back from that. So the gap is PBIS has been shown to positively affect student self-efficacy. However, research has been done on a school-wide basis. So self-efficacy has also been shown to have a positive effect on academic performance. Once again, this was only done on a school-wide basis. So the gap is when PBIS is specifically looked at for BD students. Since these students are placed on tier 3, whereas the majority of the school is placed on tier 1 or a few others on tier 2, BD students are on tier 3. So it's just a different implementation process for these students. They have the individual level where the rest of the school does not. So the purpose is to examine the effects of PBIS. The impact on the field of study is yet to be determined. Initial findings showed that there was little to no impact on academic performance or self-efficacy. However, some of the limitations that we're going to discuss later would kind of have to do with that. Limitations show more research would provide more information. So these limitations also discuss how the research would provide more information for academic performance. A longer timetable would then be able to encompass the entire 3-year implementation period instead of just the first year. Impact on practitioners. Learned about how important self-efficacy is. The past research also shows that PBIS has a positive impact and can help affect self-efficacy. Because the research has shown how important self-efficacy is for these students, it also shows how important PBIS could possibly have on these students if it is implemented correctly. So the methods, AB research designed was used for self-efficacy. This way the participants were their own control and enabled comparison between phases 1 and 2. AB research design was for the academic performance. Once again, the participants were their own control. The AB was used for academic performance instead of AB because of the assessment time frame of this study. The setting was a K-5 elementary school. We were in year 1 of implementation of PBIS. So most of the school was focusing on hallways. However, some teachers, like me, were able to do it in their classrooms. We have 620 students, and the positive choices were rewarded with called a Pride Paw ticket. So if the student was seeing something doing correctly, making a positive choice, helping out others, they were able to earn a ticket. And these tickets were then collected in the classrooms. And then the classrooms were keeping the tickets each week, and then the school earns rewards each month. So it's once again a school-wide implementation. The whole school is working towards the same common goal. So my participants were 4th grade BD students. There were 2 female students and 3 male students. One of the females was African American, and the rest of the participants were Caucasian. The assessments used for this data were the Northwest Education Assessment, otherwise known as the NWEA. This assessment is given 3 times a year, and it is taken on the computer. The General Self-Efficacy Scale, the GSE, was taken at the beginning of each phase and at the very end to measure how they were feeling about their confidence levels when they can handle new challenges. This was done with paper and pencil. So once again, the timing, the NWEA scores were used from the spring for these students. These were taken before PBIS was implemented into the school at all. That was used as their control. The fall NWEA scores were used for the implementation data. So this is why the AB design was used here. The GSE, once again, was administered at the beginning, at the end, to see how students were feeling about their confidence level. The data analysis was a dependent t-test and was used for both sets of data. And my hypothesis was that the scores would go up in both areas. This was not confirmed. So this is the students' GSE scores. You can see table 1 shows these scores during each phase. The scores stayed relatively the same. However, there was some variation in the scores. The standard deviation did vary, especially during baseline 2. Here are the NWEA scores. This was also a t-test. A large p-value of 0.806 indicates weak evidence. This shows that the hypothesis was rejected. So the implications show little to no effect on students while PBIS was implemented. Past research still supports PBIS. So currently, even though my study did not support past research, it still would be a good idea to maybe do a longer timetable, follow the full 3-year implementation, and further study may show that my study should have followed current research. Some of the limitations, once again, was the time. PBIS is intended to be done over a 3-year period, and this study was much shorter. A longer study would possibly yield more data, and it would also be in line with past research. All of the past research was done over the full implementation period, while this study was not. NWEA assessment. The assessment was only given 3 times during the year, which leads to limited data. Even though it was used before and after, it would be more likely to show those changes if the assessments were used over more assessments or the entire school year. Another option would be to find an assessment that is given more frequently. However, that could be a little difficult with the implementation period being 3 years, which means the students would need to be able to take the same assessment for 3 years. There are very, very few assessments that are given all 3 years in a row. NWEA is one of those, which is why I chose it. The proximity is another limitation. I teach art, which means I see the students once a week. So the students only come into my classroom once a week for 45 minutes. I just don't have as much access to them as, say, the BD teacher would have. If I had been with the students more often, I could have given the GSE at a more common time period. Also, I could have done it when they were on a more even emotional state, because that is an issue sometimes we have with BD students. Onto their emotional state, they have those severe highs and lows. So depending on how they were feeling when the GSC was administered, that would affect their scores. So the researcher had very limited time. A BD teacher or somebody who sees them more frequently would be able to make sure that the GSC was administered when the students were feeling relatively the same, and this might show a more consistent higher or lower, or how they're feeling about their abilities. So some recommendations would be to perform the study for the full 3 years, similar to all of the past research, which was done over 3 years, some even longer. It's intended to take those 3 years, and that's why it would show more consistent results with past research. The past research does show that the positive effects of PBIS, and this should still be considered. My study did not mesh with past research at all. Most past research shows how positive this is. Research supports the importance of self-efficacy on academic performance. High self-efficacy will help students perform higher, and educators should take steps to help students raise their self-efficacy. They can do this by modeling high self-efficacy. They can also help the students find strategies to become more successful, and possibly teaching to the multiple intelligences, because all students learn differently. Here are the references that I used, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation.